Around 11% of all US adults will experience a panic attack in the next 12 months, which is like 28 million people. Starts to develop panic attacks or has panic attacks in a recurrent way, can't figure them out, can't make them go away. And I felt not only was I failing on a daily basis, but I started to feel like a failure in life as a dad and as a life partner and as a businessman.
Welcome to OCD Whisperer Podcast. Today with me, I have Drew Linsalata, and Drew is the creator and host of the Anxious Truth Podcast, which boasts 3 million downloads and a thriving, engaged social media community. Drew is also an author, educator, and advocate in the anxiety disorder community, a graduate student in clinical mental health counseling, and a therapist in training. A former sufferer of panic disorder, agoraphobia, and clinical depression for more than 25 years before fully recovering. Drew has lived the experience that he speaks and writes about. Welcome to the show, Drew.
Thank you, Christina. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you said yes, because in seeing a lot of your actual Instagram stuff, I know you talk a lot about panic, and, I've not actually kind of had any episode about specifically panic, and there's so many people that struggle with this. So, I wonder if we can start off by just, if you can share with us a little bit about, what is a panic attack? What are some symptoms? Like, how would somebody know they're having a panic attack?
Yeah, it's a good question. A panic attack is a thing that almost many adults will experience at least once in their life. And some of the best estimates I've seen, at least in the US, is like around 11% of all US adults will experience a panic attack in the next 12 months, which is like 28 million people. It's a lot of people, right? So it's actually a more common experience than we think. A panic attack is basically what happens when, presumably out of the blue, that fight or flight mechanism that's wired into all of us to keep us alive, to prepare us to flee a threat or fight for our lives or get out of danger, is triggered for no reason that we can see. And so we wind up with all of the naturally occurring reactions and symptoms and sensations and thoughts that are designed for a specific environment, which is one where we need to be safe, except that we're already safe. So we do not know why our heart is pounding and we're sweating and we can't breathe and our vision is weird and our legs are shaking and we have this sense of impending doom and we don't know what it is, and it's terrifying and there's no reason for it. We don't know what it is. So anybody who's ever experienced an actual panic attack will know what I'm talking about. It's not just feeling anxious, it is feeling like you are in immediate mortal danger and not knowing why and not knowing what to do about it.
Yeah, honestly, I have to say I had my kind of the last one that lasted 4 days about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's so insanely intense. You wake up with it, you go to bed with it, you can barely sleep. Basically, if you get like 2-3 hours, you're great, but it's super intense. And for anybody listening, I'm sure some people might wonder: is there nothing that there's nothing that kind of triggers it per se, or are there things that can trigger or bring on a panic attack, or does it just happen to occur on its own?
Well, we call it a panic attack when it occurs for seemingly no reason, right? But I mean, there's a lot of argument that says, sure, you might be in a particularly stressful time in your life. Maybe you just experienced a major loss in your life, or you're having financial troubles, or all of these things. And, you just get to the point where it bubbles over and you might experience a panic attack, where that can happen. I'm always addressing the situation where the panic attacks are recurring and you don't know why they're happening. And if there was a particular trigger, it stops mattering because you're just now worried about having the next panic attack. But many people have panic attacks, and here's the interesting thing. When I say, 11% of the US adult population will have a panic attack in the next 12 months, but a small percentage of those will develop panic disorder. So many people don't know why they panicked, or they will understand, oh yeah, I'm really under the gun and man, that sucked. But then they'll just move on. And like, well, I hope it doesn't happen again, but we had that. I hated that. And I'm just under the gun. And that's probably why it happened. And they're okay with that explanation. I'm always addressing a population in which, oh, no, I need to find out what it is because I can't let that happen again. And then things snowball.
Yeah. And,
So,
the other thing, speaking about this, you did kind of in your part of the introduction was that you were dealing also with agoraphobia. And I'm sure anybody listening, a question I'm imagining the audience might have is, well, what is that exactly? So would you
yeah.
mind also kind of talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, we can talk about agoraphobia. People sometimes think that agoraphobia is like it's its own thing. Somehow I got agoraphobia. You don't get agoraphobia. You actually, believe it or not, in my opinion, in my interpretation, you learn to be agoraphobic. So agoraphobia doesn't always come along with panic attacks. It can happen without panic attacks, but the most common form of agoraphobia is where somebody starts to develop panic attacks or has panic attacks in a recurrent way, can't figure them out, can't make them go away. And then they begin to respond to those by avoiding any situation that they think might trigger a panic attack. And since they panic in this situation, they won't do that anymore. Then they panic over here, so they won't do that anymore. Then they won't go to the supermarket. Then they won't go to the school pickup line. Then they can't drive on the highway. And avoidant behavior just takes over, and your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller until technically agoraphobia doesn't mean you're stuck in your house. That's how most people know it. But it means that you have developed an incredibly restricted lifestyle where very few places are, air quotes, safe to you. And you will refuse to do most of life without some really big conditions like I have to take a pill or I have to have my essential oils or my safe people with me. That's agoraphobia. It's an extreme expression of avoidance to try to avoid how you will feel if you panic or have high anxiety.
Yeah, isn't that incredible? Just in terms of human nature and the things we will do and the length we'll go to try to solve in any way possible, feeling really bad, bottom line, right? Feeling horrendous.
Yeah,
Um,
we're very creative when it comes to that. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It really, it is. It is. And, I mean, I deal and I work predominantly with just for whatever reason, but like in my practice, I have like 95%, it's all OCD folks. But, similarly, right, with OCD, it's so much avoidant behaviors or repetitive behaviors. But again, great lengths that we all as humans go to. And we are very creative. And I mean, I have OCD, so like I definitely know things I used to do, to try to avoid it. It's just incredible. And, with that, I do want to ask you the next thing, which is, if somebody who's listening right now and they are kind of resonating with this, like, oh yeah, I have this or I've dealt with this. What would you say are things that they could do, or how do you handle this? How do you treat it?
Well, the hard thing is what you just described. Like most people, listen, humans are hardwired to go away from discomfort. We seek safety, we seek reassurance, we seek, we seek safety and comfort and soothing and all of those things. We don't want to go toward hard things. But the bad news is that when you get stuck in a loop where you are avoiding and trying desperately to not trigger the next anxiety spike or the next panic attack, you're almost assuring that the next one's going to come. And then that can lead to, I need to avoid this. I need to avoid this. You can ritualize your whole life, different diets, I can only eat this. I can only drink this. I have to do this. I have to tap. I have to, right? So it
Yeah.
gets so extreme that the way that you start to unravel that is to start to see all the things that you are trying to do to control it. And then you have to back away from those things little by little, which is super scary because that's going to mean, but that's protecting me. And you have to learn,
Right.
no, it's never been protecting you. I know that your first panic attack scared the hell out of you and you don't want to have another one ever again. And you hate them, but we have to learn that even when they happen, they are not dangerous and you can handle it and it's okay. And the goal is to take away all the avoidant behaviors so you learn that you're safe anyway. I can handle it. And then you're not afraid to panic anymore. I don't want to panic. Don't get me wrong. I'm not asking for it. But I know now that if I have a panic attack, which I can have maybe a couple times a year, it's over in 15 minutes. And then I'm shaky for 30 minutes and then I move on. That's where you want to get. That's hard. It's a hard sell for people though. Like,
Yeah, that's, I mean, I think that's kind of the conversation usually, right? Is I would say all anxiety things, it's the goal is really to interact with those items or engage in those situations, because it's a way to reteach yourself that inherently feeling uncomfortable or anxious or any of those feelings is not life threatening. Nobody's died from a panic attack. It can feel like you're going to die, but
sure.
nobody's really died from a panic attack. And it's an extremely uncomfortable situation. And so part of what I'm hearing you say too is if somebody wants to get better, it's really kind of initially kind of wrapping their mind around that you're going to need to kind of create a way or a pathway or a steps to
Mhm.
start to re-engage and kind of take some of your life back and get back into things.
Yeah, you're going to have to stop trying to control it and avoid it and stop it and manage it because you can't. For the large majority of people that try to do that, it doesn't work or doesn't work consistently. So many people will get into a rut where they find like, oh, if I follow this special diet and I don't go to these places and I make sure my life is always like this, then I'm okay. But then as soon as that apple cart gets upset, because it does, and life does that to us, it all falls apart. And then they're back to distraught and like, I don't know, like nothing works for me. But that's because what you're trying to do is control a function in your body that is not wrong. It's just triggered at the wrong time. So it's like trying to stop your body from doing a thing it's designed to do. You just have to teach it to stop doing it at the wrong time. That's all. So
Yeah, I love that. That's such a great way to frame it. Exactly. It's learning how to work with your own system. That's exactly
yeah,
right, right? It just gets tripped up at the wrong time over the wrong things.
yep, yep.
But, like you said, you're learning how to understand that about yourself essentially, and get a different relationship with it so that you don't have to overreact and overprotect and all that.
And there should be comfort in the idea when I gave those numbers in the beginning that so many people will have a panic attack this year, but not interpret it as horrible. So consider that, like many people have panic attacks and never develop panic disorder or agoraphobia. Why is that? There's your proof that I know it feels like you're going to die or go crazy or go insane, but you're not. And these people, for some reason, don't share your interpretation. So follow their lead, if you will. A person
Hmm.
who has panic attacks but not panic disorder has a panic attack, hates it, and then says, well, I guess I got to go on with my day now. Follow that lead, if you will, even though it seems ridiculous for me to say that. I get that.
Yeah, so I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I think one of the things, maybe you come across this as well, right? But sometimes when kind of providing education or talking to folks, there can be this whole concept around motivation because the fear takes over, doubts take over. I'm just curious, how do you address that, or how do you talk about it?
So the motivation is a tough one. People ask me all the time, like, well, what made you get better? How did you decide to do all these scary things? And there was a lot of things. I mean, honestly, I started to be I was so over myself to a certain extent. I'm making a joke, but it's true. And I felt not only was I failing on a daily basis, but I started to feel like a failure in life as a dad and as a life partner and as a businessman. Like it was controlling my life. And the pain of the avoidance got greater than the pain of the fear in the moment.
Mm,
And that drove me to say, okay, I got to do this a different way. So motivation can be found in a lot of different places. Sometimes your family motivates you, sometimes your career, sometimes your education motivates you, but you have to reach the point where the pain of staying where you are is greater than the pain you feel going toward the fear, if you will.
yeah.
Does that make some sort of sense? That's a very guru sounding thing to say, but that is,
Well, it is, because that's what I was going to ask. I kind of find myself just in just lived experience of life, and in general with clients, with so on, but it's kind of like, yeah, like it's almost like we have to hit some sort of like it has to get bad enough that
mm-hmm,
you're like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm willing to do something else, whatever that is. And a lot of times I find myself hearing that more often than not.
yeah,
Even though I know that, like in different therapies, like an acceptance commitment therapy, we want to connect with values and kind of use a different approach, more of like, let's look at the thing you want to look forward to, that's important for you, that's meaningful to help drive you forward.
yeah.
And I think, yeah, that also works. But it's just interesting because I think so far, just from direct lived experience, most people, I will say, really, that I hear that they really make a change when, but it really just gets bad, that they're just like, I just don't want to do this anymore. Like this is too limiting. This is too restricting. I'm tired of this. Like you said, I'm over my own self.
Yeah. And it's not that easy. I don't mean to minimize it and say like, oh, one morning I woke up and I just decided to get better. That's not the way it really works. But I love that. I'm a huge fan of acceptance commitment therapy. And I think connecting with your values, this type of anxiety, panic disorder, agoraphobia, OCD, it will take your values and swipe them right off the table. So there are none left. But
Yeah.
then you start to experience the pain of missing those values. And it starts to happen slowly and like, wait a minute, this took everything from me and I let it. And I'm not doing that anymore. So I'm going to go get those values back and start to pile them up again and start to move toward them again. And that's when you start to really do the scary work. But I do agree that for some people, and some people who listen to me and hear these techniques, and they're scary and they're hard and they resist them, sometimes you're just not ready to do them. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but I would never force anybody to do it. Sometimes you just need more consequence, and hey, if I can just avoid a little more, my life is fine this way. Okay, that's an invalid decision, and I respect that decision. Sometimes you have to get to the point where you just can't stand it anymore. And then you start to do it different. Which is
I,
okay.
I have to say I do agree, and that's definitely a common thing I hear from people, just all around, is essentially that they're not either ready, or they have a really kind of belief that this is still okay. I'm still managing, even though things clearly are not okay. But again, it speaks to that point, right? Is that it's like, no, it has to, like, something else has to happen to finally, get
Yeah.
folks to understand that this is not a way to live. But
Mhm.
until that point, it's everybody's decision, right? If somebody's like, well, I'm okay with this, this is fine for me, the way I'm doing things now, then okay, that's totally, a choice that you get to make, and that's your life. And just like, we talk about willingness, like you don't have to always be ready is what I say, but are you willing to feel uncomfortable, right? Because when are we really 100% ready for whatever? Like sometimes I guess, but not really. I'd say we're
Never.
more willing to have experiences or willing to do certain things because something about it is either important to us or somebody's important to us and they're asking us to do it, or but
Yeah.
usually it's something like that. And it's more that willingness to have just to feel sometimes uncomfortable, but then remembering what it's for, right? It's for that relearning.
Right. Why am I doing this? And people sometimes get a little bit dicey with like, this sounds cruel. You're telling me to intentionally trigger myself and intentionally be afraid. Well, if you don't understand why and you're not connected to the why at that level where like I really want to do this to get better, then I get that. Because if you don't remember why you're doing those, it would seem like a form of self-torture. That's true. So
Right.
understanding, and that psychoeducational part of it, where you start to understand the principles and the mechanics, like, oh, this is why I have to do this scary thing. I don't want to do it. It's fair. But yeah, that's really important. But that thing where like people think they should like just have to be ready. Well, you might not be ready from a life standpoint. That's fine. But ready where like, well, I have to find a way to not be so afraid, that you'll never be ready for. You only are less afraid after you do the things while you're afraid. And that's always a hard thing to say, but it's true. So
Yeah. And then do you find that it's helpful for folks to start with something kind of like a small little step just to help them kind of learn and show themselves to build that confidence? Like, okay, I got through that. I could do it.
yep.
What am I
Yeah,
learning
I'm a
from
huge
that? And then, okay, can I do something else?
Yeah, like in the old school, we would call that graduated exposure, and it still counts, or gradient exposure. I've heard incremental exposure. I talk about being systematic and incremental, and I think that's the best way to do it. So if you are dealing with, if you're housebound because your panic attacks are so intense whenever you go out, as an example, which is very common, there's nothing wrong with starting like by literally timing some time at your front door with your coat on in a panic because you feel like you're about to go outside. I had to practice literally learning how to go back out my door. Those were terrifying moments, but it's okay to start that way. You don't solve this problem by going from stuck on your sofa for 6 months to taking a vacation across the country in a week and you fix it. It rarely, if ever, works that way. Start as small as you need to. If it triggers your discomfort and your fear and you don't want to do it, you're on the right track, no matter how small that is. I know people that
Beautiful.
started with as things as small as changing their behaviors in their house. And some people listening will understand this. Starting to shower with the door closed could be a start for some people. So anybody who is ever like, I'm afraid to be in the shower because what if I pass out or I die in the shower? They won't get to me if the door is closed. Sleeping with your door locked instead of your house open so the EMTs can get to you. Those are perfectly fine places to start. That counts. So
Beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah. And can you, would you, if you're open to it, would you mind just sharing a little bit? Because I'm sure people might be wondering, you mentioned, you're in full recovery. What are some of the steps? And you gave some examples. What are some of the steps you took?
So when I did it, my problems over the course of 25 plus years was I was one of those unfortunate people that had a panic attack, which I will never forget my first one. They will stay with me forever. It's a very impactful experience. And that quickly, I was a textbook example of how it quickly it turned into panic disorder. And from there, I developed agoraphobia because of my response to that was avoidant. And I went in and out of that for quite a few years, 25 plus years of my life. I was probably diagnosable with OCD because, as you know, the symptomology just sort of runs all together at some point. So I dealt with intrusive thoughts about my food being poisoned. It was not fun. I dealt with an unhealthy, ridiculous, unsolvable obsession with death and existence. So I had existential OCD, probably if I had been diagnosed. And then I went through periods of clinical depression. So what did I do is I literally started going directly to do the things that would trigger my panic every single day. Like I just got so fed up with it that for me, I was agoraphobic. So I'd have to leave the house, get in the car and drive away by myself. And I spent months literally driving every morning during a very cold winter around my neighborhood, then a little more, then a little more, then a little more, then taking bigger steps onto the bigger roads. And I had to build that little by little. So those are the things that I did. And I had to drop all of my, make sure I have cold water, make sure I have mints, make sure I have this. It was tedious, boring, hard, slogging, discouraging work sometimes, but it works. And that's what I did. That was my specific situation. Everybody's will be a little different based on their particular triggers and their lifestyle,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
that's what it looked like for me. It was
And
probably a
how
good.
long did it take you to get better?
People ask me that all the time, and I think it takes you however long it takes you. Now, for me, I did the work. I first of all had the privilege because I own my own business. I will accept that, and so I had the privilege of a flexible schedule. I own my own business that I couldn't go to. By the way, I would not go to my own business, which was only 8 miles from my house, so that sucked. But in fact, one of my goals was to get back to my own office. So it took me, I would say that I got to about 70 to 80% in probably 6 to 8 months. I can't tell. Because as you probably know, there's no day when I woke up and said, I'm recovered. I actually don't know when it happened. It just happens gradually. The last 20% where there were big things like I'm going to drive into New York City by myself, or I'm going to fly somewhere by myself. Those are not things that happen all the time. I live not too far outside of New York City, but the last 20% took much longer, another year or more. I didn't fly for like 3 years because I didn't have to. So it was a good 6 or 8 months before I was living what I think was a reasonably normal life, but I just had to keep pushing and pushing to make sure I got all the way. Who
Wonderful.
knows? I've seen people recover very quickly in months, but I've seen people take 2 years. It takes what it takes.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's exactly right. But I think everybody is always curious, kind of, well, how long did it take you, right? Because, but the truth is, it's true. It really depends on, as far as I see it, is, how much work you're willing to really put in, and, you'll reap the benefits. Like you were saying, you chose to do something every single day, and that moves you forward. And then of course, there's life, and life is happening all the time. So there's other things that could be going on those days that whatever may make it more difficult or challenging. But again, like you were saying, is that you got to just keep showing up and keep doing it.
Part of it was like accepting that life was happening around me, and not only just doing my planned exposures, which most of that was driving or being home alone. It was starting to say yes again to life things. And I have found in my experience with a very large number of people, and in my own experience, that making life part of recovery made it far more durable because I had a wider and broader experience. I didn't learn to go to the supermarket and drive on the highway. I learned to do life again, which was, I know that's another guru sounding ridiculous thing, and I hate to say stuff like that, but there was truth in that.
But I love it, and I think that's exactly true. I think that's what happens. People, we give anxiety, whatever the anxiety issue you're dealing with, but we give it too much power, and it's like we put all our faith and trust into that, and then we start to listen to that versus saying, no, let me put my faith and trust back in myself and in my actual life. So I think it's a very excellent point to make, and for anybody listening, really take that to heart and check in with yourself, right? Like, how much has your anxiety taken from you, and let's go ahead and get it back, right? Because you can have it back, and you can have a beautiful life.
And in the end, it was really just rebuilding. Like every human being has a relationship with anxiety in some way, shape, or form. I just had to rebuild that normal relationship. So I could still be anxious now and then because I'm alive. I'm not just afraid to be anxious anymore. It serves its purpose like it was supposed to now.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yep,
beautiful. Yep. Thank you so much for coming on the show and for talking about this. If anybody wants to find you, how can they find you?
All the stuff is on theanxioustruth.com. Just go there, like all my social media, the podcast, the books I've written, all that stuff. Just go to my website, theanxioustruth.com, and it's all there.
So, perfect. Thank you so much, Drew.
You're welcome, Christina. Thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it.